Now, I heard, and I saw just a little bit of it, but I heard that Mitt Romney made a fairly long speech. And I mean, honestly, I thought I'll just address it quickly because it's irrelevant. Look, Mitt is a failed candidate. He failed. He failed horribly. The third debate, he failed badly. That was a race, I have to say, folks, that should have been won. That was a race that absolutely should have been won. And I don't know what happened to him. He disappeared. He disappeared. And I wasn't happy about it, I'll be honest, because I am not a fan of Barack Obama, and that was a race. And I backed Mitt Romney. I backed him. You can see how loyal he is. He was begging for my endorsement. I could have said, Mitt, drop to your knees. He would have dropped to his knees. He was begging. He was begging me. And did you see how great? He said, oh, I'm not big like him. He's the great businessman, all that stuff. Well, since then, I've done much better. And now he tries to demean, but we'll talk about that in a second. But Mitt was thinking about running again. He ran a horrible campaign. It was a campaign that should have never been lost. You're running against a failed president. He came up with the 47%. He demeaned 47% of the people in our country, right? The famous 47%. Once that was said, I'll be honest, once that was said, a lot of people thought it was over for him. Then the last month and a half, he disappeared. And I called his people. I said, you have to do yourself a favor. Obama, say what you want. He was on Jay Leno. He was on David Letterman. He was all over the place the last 3-4 weeks. Mitt was looking for zoning for a 9-car garage or something in California, right? I said, what's he doing? Who cares about a garage? You're running for president. And Mitt was a disaster as a candidate. So what happened, and it was very strong, and I think if the press goes back, they'll see it. When I heard he was running again, and I wasn't sure I was going to be running, but I was very, very strong to Mitt and to everybody, and publicly, not to talk to him, because I didn't even want to talk to him. I was so disappointed in him, because he let us down. He let us down. You know, it's one thing you lose, and you work, and you work, and you go. He let us down. He should have won. Something happened to him. He went away. He was gone. He was horrible in the third debate. It was a horrible, something happened. I don't know what happened. Maybe someday they'll write a book. His campaign guy was terrible, terrible. He had a terrible campaign manager who's always on television, Stuart Stevens or something. He's always on television knocking everybody. The guy ran one of the worst campaigns in the history of modern politics. And Mitt ran, probably it was the worst run that most people have seen, because most people thought that the Republican candidate would win. So when Mitt started raising his head a few months ago, I was very strong. I said, Mitt Romney should not run. He's a choke artist. And I said it very strongly. I wanted to keep him in. And then Jeb Bush actually convinced Mitt not to run. Can you imagine? Jeb sold him. Jeb, he's a good salesman. See, now that he's out, I'll say Jeb's a good salesman, right? He's a high-energy salesman. But Mitt was afraid of Jeb, because he was afraid that Jeb would get the money and Jeb would get the whatever. And, you know, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid of Jeb, I can tell you that. So what happened is Jeb Bush convinced Mitt not to run. Mitt was going to run. It was going to be a third attempt, the second one being one of the great catastrophes. The first one just didn't happen, so that's okay. But the second was a catastrophe. And what happened is he went to see Jeb, and Jeb had him convinced that he's going to run, he's got the money, he's this, and Mitt chickened out. But I'll tell you the real reason he chickened out. It wasn't Jeb. It was me. Because I said, he's a choke. If you remember, Mitt was all set to run. I know this from people that are close to him. And I think he probably still has a desire, maybe at the convention, to try and get some kind of a thing. Hillary Clinton will destroy him in the election. Assuming she's allowed to run, assuming she's not arrested for the email situation. So anyway, when I heard Mitt was going to run, a little before this period of time, I was very tough. I said, he can't run, he can't run. He was going to run, he can't run. Then I started saying, look, we got to keep him out because he's going to lose. He's a choke artist. He's an absolute, and I started hitting him so hard. In fact, people say, why'd you hit him so hard? Because we cannot take another loss. We can't take another loss. And Mitt is indeed a choke artist. He choked. And he choked like I've never seen anyone choked, other than Rubio when Chris Christie was grilling him. That was one of the great chokes. Oh, no. Rubio of Florida. That was one of the great jokes I've ever seen. He was standing there shaking, sweating. I was getting ready. I'm standing here like this. He's right over here. I'm getting ready to grab him because I thought he was going down. I'm telling you. But Mitt did a big, big joke, and we had to keep him out. So look, a couple of things I heard he said. First of all, he doesn't mention the fact that I built a city on the west side of Manhattan, that I built buildings all over Manhattan. He didn't mention into this that he was talking about a beef, and he talked about a water company, which, by the way, I still have. I supply all my clubs with the water. Numerous of those things I have, the magazine, other things. And I have to tell you this. So ultimately, Mitt chickened out. And now he's saying, probably sees Hillary's very weak. And now he said, I wish I went. I wish I tried it. But ultimately he didn't, because he would have gotten beaten very badly. But I'll tell you what, a couple of things were mentioned that we have to discuss. First of all, when he talks about me, I wrote just a couple of them down. When he talks about me, they don't want to talk about 92-story buildings all over the place. They don't want to talk about the Bank of America building in San Francisco, 1290 Avenue of the Americas. They don't want to talk about the West Side Railroad Yards, where I built a city on the west side of Manhattan, a tremendous city on the west side of Manhattan. They don't want to talk about 40 Wall Street and all the buildings. They want to talk about water, which I still have. I supply all my clubs. I have a water company. They want to talk about a magazine, and I have a magazine that goes to all my clubs. They want little tiny thing, wherever you can find. By the way, a school, little deal, but very, I loved it when it was there. They call it Trump University, Trump Initiative. But I will tell you, just so you understand on the school had 98% approval rating. But you had an attorney that felt, maybe I can sue Trump and get something. The school had a 98%. In other words, 98% of the people that took the courses, we signed report cards. That's why you can't settle a case like that. You put somebody up in the stand. Did you write this? The most beautiful thing. They did a commercial. They took it down where two people were going and saying negative, and then we showed them the statement that they wrote. They had to take the commercial down because 98% of the people that took the courses said really wonderful things about it. The other thing's got an A from the Better Business Bureau. So I say, how do I settle a case like this? A B plus would be okay too. B plus would be okay, but we did better than a B plus. So I can't, and here's one thing I say about business. I watch these bankers, and they get millions of dollars a year, $40, $50 million. Frankly, it's ridiculous. And then they'll settle with the government if they're sued by the government for $2 billion, $3 billion, $5 billion, $12 billion. And I say to them, why don't you fight it? They said, well, it's the government. We don't want to fight. Well, I say, you got to fight it, because if you don't fight it, everyone's going to sue you. And that's what happens. You ever see it? They settle for $2 billion. The next week they get sued again. You got to fight these things out. You have to do things. You have to do what's right. So with university, I knew I could get some bad publicity on it, but I have to do what's right. Do we agree with that, by the way? So it's a very small case. It's a civil case. It's not a big deal. And I'm going to win it in court. And it'll cost me more money to win it in court than I could settle for, in my opinion. But I'm going to win it in court. And I said, this is lousy timing, because it's too bad it wasn't a little bit later, because I happened to be running for president. But I have other suits too. Any businessman or businesswoman has lawsuits. People sue to get their money back. They sue for this. They sue for that. They sue for a million different reasons. So just so you understand, 98% approval rating, an A from the Better Business Bureau. We're going to win the case. Mark it down. We're going to win the case. It'll be forever, because it takes forever. But that's the way it is. I don't like to settle cases. I don't like to do it, because once you settle cases, what happens is everybody says he's a settler. Let's sue. That's not me. A lot of people don't sue me because they say it's too hard. So one of the things that Mitt brought up, which I think is so serious, he said about trade. We have to keep trade. Nobody knows more about trade than me. I mean, I made so much more money than Mitt. I have a store that's worth more money than Mitt. It's a store. And actually, it was funny, because I made that statement jokingly when I was in Iowa. And the Des Moines Register, a paper that's actually a terrible paper, if you want to know the truth. But they called up, they said, that's a terrible statement. That's a terrible statement for you to make that statement about. And the people put me on. I said, what are you saying? They said, you said you have a store that's worth more than Mitt. So let's say Mitt's worth $150 or $200 million. I said, what's he worth? They said, $150 million. I said, yeah, the store's worth much more than him. It's on Fifth Avenue, it's good. Gucci, the Gucci store. So I said, yeah, it's worth much more. We don't believe a store is worth $150 million. I said, well, go ahead, go get a couple of. They actually went out, got 3 appraisers, and they said, you know what? That store is worth from $400 million to $1 billion too. And by the way, this isn't me talking. You can go check your local Des Moines Register if it's still open. I'm not sure it's still open. But anyway, but I built an amazing company. And you know, one of the reasons you know it's amazing, the hottest development site, probably in the history of the General Services Administration, the GSA, that's the government service, is the old post office site. That's where the post office is built in Washington, D.C., an entire block fronting on Pennsylvania Avenue. In other words, if I don't get there through the White House, I'm getting there anyway, okay, folks? And fronting on Pennsylvania Avenue, one of the most beautiful buildings in the country, and incredible. It's a landmark building. And the GSA for many, many, many years has owned it, and they've wanted to develop it for 30, 35 years, and it just sort of never worked out. Big job, and never happened. And then they went to bid. And in bidding it, they had more bidders and more high-level bidders, I think, than they ever had before. So let's assume it's just about the hottest job that they've ever put out to bid. Every hotel company wanted it. I actually got it on building a 300-room, super, super luxury hotel. But they bid it, and every hotel company, every office company, everybody wanted it. So they went out to a public bid. And one of the things in choosing the bidder was how strong is the bidder and how good is the bidder's idea. Well, they loved my idea because what we're going to do, this will be one of the great hotels of the world. It is now 2 years ahead of schedule. It's going to open in September. We're supposed to open up in September in 2 years. We're 2 years ahead of schedule. And by the way, the GSA people are terrific people. And we're under budget a little bit. In fact, the only reason we're only a little bit under budget is that I'm using marble instead of terrazzo. Not a bad idea, right? So, etc. A lot of different things. But we're going to super end, the highest end. And the reason I got chosen was, number one, my financial statement was so strong that it could guarantee completion because they didn't want to have a mess where they build 25%, then it goes out of business. And number two, we had the best idea. So when I listened to this Mitt, and by the way, this is in the Obama administration, in all fairness, I wouldn't say I had an advantage. In fact, I said to my daughter, she was very much involved with that. I said, you know, maybe we're not going to get it no matter how good we do. But my financial statement is so strong, and I, by the way, put it in, you know, Romney talks about taxes, right? Why isn't he doing his taxes? Maybe this. You don't learn anything from, very little do you learn from taxes, very little. You know, you look at a tax sheet, you can't learn very much. But I did file almost 100 pages of financial statements with the federal elections. And it shows that I have a net worth that could be over $10 billion, probably over. And I don't want to do that in a bragging way. I tell you because that's the kind of thinking we need. We have 19 trillion, as Paul was saying, $19 trillion in debt. It's the kind of thinking we need. I have very low debt. I have tremendous cash flow. It's an unbelievable company that I built. And I filed my financials. So when he says, oh, maybe there's something in his tax return, there's nothing. But I get audited every single year. And because the company is so big, they audit, I understand, Fortune 500 companies every year. Because my company is so big, or some other reason, which is unfair, but because my company is so big, let's leave it at that, they audit me every year. I think it's very unfair that they audit me every year, but I've been audited every year for many years. Now, when the audit's finished, I'll release my tax returns. I have nothing, but I don't want to do it. And nobody in this room would say, you're being audited and here's the tax return. You get audited, you finish up the audit, routine stuff, you finish, and then you release the tax returns. But if anybody wants to, like Mitt, would like to go down and go to the Federal Election Office, you'll see almost 100 pages of financials that were filed ahead of schedule. I could have delayed it for 6 months. I filed them within 30 days. And believe me, I had to work hard with the accountants. The accountants worked overtime because I didn't want them saying, oh, he's asking for extensions. So that's really the thing. So with Mitt, I just wanted to tell you that he came out, it was very nasty. I mean, I thought he was a better person than that. I did help him. I raised money for his campaign. I actually had 2 fundraisers for him. In fact, the first fundraiser was so successful that we had the second one that same day. His wife, who was a lovely woman, by the way, a really lovely woman, she came up. We had a fundraiser in my apartment at Trump Tower, and it was so oversubscribed. I did a great job. They couldn't have cared less about him. In fact, a lot of them said, Donald, he's a stiff. He's not going to win. I said, oh, he'll be fine. He's a stiff. I should have listened to the guy. But we had a fundraiser, and it was so big, and it was raining out. I won't forget this one. I was raining, and really raining. It was a miserable, miserable day. And the people came in, hundreds of people, phase one. And then we said, there's too many people to put them in one. So we called for another one an hour later, after it ended 1 hour. And because everybody's shoes were so wet, I ruined my carpet. That's why I ruined. This carpet was wiped out. And nobody thanked me for the carpet. Hey, maybe I can send Mitt a bill for carpet ruined, right? But I always, when